One of the big changes that has come in with .NET version 8 is in the area of Blazor. Now, I've done quite a few videos on Blazor, there's a whole playlist of them, and I'm not going to assume you know everything about Blazor, but the thing you need to be aware of is the difference between Blazor Server and Blazor WebAssembly. So if you're not familiar with that, do have a look at that video, because those ideas are taken forward in a very powerful way with .NET 8. So let's dive straight in and start looking at what this is all about. And what I'm going to do is create a new project, and I'm going to filter it for Blazor. And you can see there's quite a few projects in there, but the one that's most important is this new one at the top, Blazor Web App. So really all the other ones are kind of there for backwards compatibility for the old style of Blazor applications. But if you want to use the new features, then just go for that Blazor Web App, and we'll call this Blazor Net 8. And then when we go on to the next page, this is where we see things are a little bit different. So we've got .NET 8, we won't worry about authentication at this stage, but there you can see we've got these two drop downs, and one of them is the interactive render mode. And in there, we've got now 4 options. Now, 2 of those options, you can see server and WebAssembly, are pretty much the same as we've seen in the past. The other 2, none and then auto, which as it shows is both server and WebAssembly, that's what we're going to look at in this video. But I'm going to choose auto because it's the most flexible one, but we can change our mind just by changing the code a little bit. But the other thing I've got as an option is whether we go for that as global or per page stroke component. And that is the really powerful thing, because we no longer have to make a decision to say we're going to write a Blazor server application or we're going to write a Blazor WebAssembly application. We can now choose on the basis of each component which is going to be most appropriate for what we're trying to do. It may be they all go one way, it may be they all go the other, but we've got the power now. So let's click on that and then just click create, and that will create our new application for us. And what we'll do is just immediately run that up, because when we run it, it looks exactly the same as all of the other templates for this sort of thing. And so we've got the home page that just says hello world, we've got the counter page with that counter on there, and we've got the weather page that gives us a random weather forecast for various dates. So that's just the same as you've seen in Blazor apps for several years. But now let's look at the differences. And the first thing is we've got 2 projects within the solution. So we've got Blazor Net 8, which is just what I called it, and then it's also created Blazor Net 8 Client. And you can see that the startup project is set to Blazor Net 8, because when I run this in Visual Studio or on a server, that's what's actually going to be executed server side. And then Blazor Net 8 Client is going to be the DLL that's delivered to the browser and is going to be run using WebAssembly if we've opted for anything like that. So that's the difference between them. We can also see, if we look in here at components and then look at pages, that's where we've got the home and the weather page. And then if we look on the Blazor Net 8 client, that's where we've got the counter page. And again, you probably work out why that is, because counter is a dynamic page. We saw that when I clicked the button it increased the counter, whereas home and weather and also the error we got there are static pages. They don't interact with the user once they've been generated. And that's showing that we can have both of these existing side by side. Now you'll remember when I created the project, one of the options for the rendering was none. And what that means is we have purely static rendering. That's to say all of the rendering is done on the server, and then the resulting HTML is sent to the browser just to display in the normal way. And that's rather like things used to be with MVC or Razor pages, although the syntax is a little bit different. But the idea that all the work is done on the server is good for certain circumstances, particularly when things are static, like the weather and the home page, because we don't need to do any interaction. So if we look at that home page, we can see that it's just giving us the hello world, nothing particularly important about that. And if we run that up and then we look at the page source, we can see that it's given us just exactly that page directly. So we've got the hello world and the welcome message there, all working fine. Plus, of course, the navigation and other things like that. If we look at the weather page, that's a little bit more interesting, because although it's static, it does have some functionality. So we can see down here that it's creating those random weather forecasts that are then going to get displayed in that table. And you'll also see that deliberately, to simulate the fact that this would typically be data coming from another web service or from a database, it's put this little delay. And in fact, I'm going to increase that a little bit. Let's make that something more like 2000, just so we can really see what's going on. And what you can also see is that we've got this if forecast equals null, then we have the loading message, and then once it's loaded, after 2 seconds now I've changed that, then it will fill in the data. And if we run that one up and go to the weather page, we can see there it's saying loading, and then after 2 seconds we can see the data arrives. And that was quite impressive because it updated the page even though we've said this is a static page and there's nothing running on the browser. And that's done using this neat little feature, which is we've got this attribute on the page of stream rendering. And that means although all the work of the rendering and generating the HTML is done on the server, it's done in 2 phases. And you can apply this stream rendering attribute to any server-side generated page that has async functionality, and in this case, most obviously in the on-initialized async. Because what it does with this stream rendering is it delivers up the page as it stands before the async function is completed, but then keeps open the HTTP connection so it can send the finished page when it's finished. And it's easy enough to demonstrate that. If I comment that out and then run it up and go to the weather page, then we can see that it just does nothing for 2 seconds before we get the weather coming in there. Whereas if I have that in, then we saw that it shows that loading, which was the initial rendition of the page, and then we get the final result. And if we again look at the page source there, you can see that what's come through is the full weather forecast there, so that's the final result that we had. So that's the default behavior that we have, this idea of static rendering done on the server, which is very, very efficient and gets you results quick enough. But it's not going to be much good for something like our counter, because our counter is just this simple but classic example of something that's going to be interactive. So we've got the button, increments the current count, and that's what gets displayed. And you can see that when I generated this project, it gave it the render mode of interactive auto. Remember, I selected auto from the drop-down. And what that is doing is overriding the default behavior, which we had for the home and the weather, which is to make things static. And it's saying that the counter page is going to have this different render mode. Let's get rid of that for now and run this up and go to the counter. And it all looks okay, but if I start trying to click it, it does nothing at all, because it simply said this is a static page. It generates a button because we've asked for a button, but the button has no functionality at all. So for static pages, although you can put them in the client application, if you don't give them the appropriate render mode, they will be just as static as if they'd been back in the main application. So not much use here. So this is why we have this render mode. And there are various ways we can set this, but what I'll do just for this video is just show you setting it on the component itself. So what I'm going to do is just put in there at render mode, and then there are 3 options we have here. And the first one I'm going to do is one called interactive server. And this is telling it to use server-side rendering, which, as I say, has been around for a long, long time in Blazor. So if we run it up and go to the counter and start clicking click me, we can now see that it's working again okay. But that, as I say, was server-side rendering, and we can demonstrate that because if I put a break on the actual functionality and then click the button, then if we look at the call stack, we can see we're getting a direct call into increment count. And because there's nothing else in the call stack, that's one of the easiest ways I find to determine whether we are doing server-side or client-side. Because as we'll see in a moment, if we did client-side and WebAssembly, then we'd see a whole JavaScript call stack in there getting to this point. So that's telling us that it's running on the server. And you can see it's just working okay there. Let's switch that though, because probably for this sort of thing like the counter, it's more appropriate to have this running in the browser using WebAssembly. So let's change that to interactive WebAssembly and run it up again. So that's all we need to change from running on the server to running in the browser, and you could do that, as we say, on a per component basis. But now we can see it's going to behave in exactly the same way. But if we now put a break in there and click the button, then we can see what I was telling you. We get this big stack where basically this is now running in the browser, even though very kindly it's debugging in Visual Studio, but we can see all the steps that that's gone through. And so that just demonstrates that we are running in the browser, and so for something like this, that's going to be a much quicker operation because there's not going to be any round trip involved in that. Now, another thing to notice here, if I right click on this and do the view page source, then you can see that it's actually delivered the initial state of the page. So we can see in there, we've got the current count as 0, and then we've got the button and that sort of thing. And although the current count is now 4, it gave us that initial page. And this is the idea of Blazor pre-rendering. And this is something else I did in one of the earlier videos, because before .NET 8, if you wanted to do this pre-rendering, you had to do quite a bit of effort to set it up. Whereas now it's actually automatic on both the mode of interactive server and interactive WebAssembly, and indeed interactive auto that we're going to look at in a moment. So you don't have to do any effort at all. And this idea of pre-rendering is really powerful in terms of performance and also in terms of search engine optimization, because it means that rather than downloading a load of WebAssembly and then having to execute that to get the display, you're downloading the initial display quite quickly, and also the initial display is there for any web crawlers to see and pick out whatever search information they want to. So this idea of the pre-rendering is just automatic now. If you don't want it, and I'm not sure I can see why you wouldn't want it, you can turn it off, because what we can do in here, if we look at that interactive WebAssembly actually, that is just a predefined default instantiation of this interactive WebAssembly render mode. So if we want to go a little bit off the beaten track, what we can do is on here, we have to say at, and then new interactive WebAssembly render mode, and then we can give it a parameter of pre-render as false. So that defaulted to true when we were looking at that render mode that it's just predefined, but now we've got it set to false. As I say, not sure why in practice you do that, but if we now run this up and go to the counter, you can see it took a lot longer to load there because it didn't do this pre-render. It still works fine, but if we now look at the page source, we can see that it's not downloaded anything to do with the initial count. Basically, it's just downloaded the blank page with the error message and that sort of thing, and it's leaving it to the WebAssembly to actually populate that, which is why we saw the slight delay. So can't see, as I say, why you'd want to turn it off, but you can do that with that pre-render set to false. And that would apply both to the interactive WebAssembly render mode and to the interactive server that we saw for doing server-side rendering. Now though, let's look at the new one, and this is the really powerful one. This is where we go for a mode of interactive auto. And I'm not going to say this is absolutely the one you should always use, but it's certainly the one that tries to give you the best of both worlds. So let's run that up and go to the counter. And let's once again put a break so that we can see where that's executing. And if I do click me, then we look at the call stack and we can see we've just got that very short call stack, and that tells us that this is server-side rendering, so that is running on the server. And so that's the status we have for that. We've still got the pre-rendering, so that's all okay, but it's done that server-side rendering because that is the fastest for startup for initialization, because it doesn't have to download your DLL to run in WebAssembly. But if I now navigate away from that and come back in, and let's set the breakpoint again and do click me, then miraculously, and this is just the amazingly powerful thing about it, you can see it's now running in WebAssembly because we've got that big call stack in JavaScript that told us it was WebAssembly. So that's the real power of auto. Auto gives you that initial rendition done in Blazor Server, which is the one that gives you the quickest startup. But then your .NET assemblies are downloaded into the browser in the background, and so subsequent execution, if you navigate away and come back, is done in Blazor WebAssembly, which gives you the quickest interaction because it's all done in the browser, and also gives you the benefit of fewer server resources being used up because we're not, for example, remembering that current count on the server. It's just stored in the browser. So that is the most powerful one we've got. But we've got these 4 modes, as I say. We've got just plain old static for something like the home page. Static also for something like weather, but with the additional feature of stream rendering. And then with something that's interactive, we can go for interactive server, just like the old server-side rendering, or we can go for interactive WebAssembly, which is just like the old WebAssembly rendering, or interactive auto, which gives us a quick startup using the server, but then quick ongoing behavior using WebAssembly. So I hope that's been helpful. There's still quite a lot more we can see in here in terms of exactly how you can configure that. I've just configured it on the basis of the entire component, but we'll look at that in a later video. But I hope you enjoyed that. Do let me know, what do you think of Blazor? Do you think you're going to find this new template with the ability to switch between the two more powerful than having to make the decision up front? Do let me know in the comments, and subscribe, click like, and I'll see you next time.